everyone. Welcome back to Writers of Silicon Valley. I'm your host, Patrick Stafford. And despite my repeated tries to maintain a consistent posting schedule, I still fail. So I am sorry about that. But here I am. Hope you'll forgive my absence. It has been in service of many great things over at UX Content Collective and, just in general. I've been fairly preoccupied. In all seriousness, though, I do have a few great conversations lined up for you. So my hope is that the second half of the year will maintain a little bit more of a consistent schedule. Today, though, my guest is someone who has done something a bit unusual for this program. So I have I've spoken with Jenny Williams for years. She was a coach on our platform at UXCC. She's worked at Google and Microsoft as a content design leader. She actually left content design, is studying a Master of Fine Arts, and has written a novel. Now, I usually don't bring people on the show who have written novels. You'd be surprised at the interesting pitches I get for this show. And we don't really have any sort of focus on novels or any type of creative work. But what caught my eye about this request was, first of all, that it came from Jenny, someone who I highly respect and is an incredible leader in content design, even though she's not working in the field right now. It came from Jenny, and the protagonist of this novel is a content designer. And so that caught my eye. And the third thing is that this novel is all about how content designers and everyone in the world really interact with and wrestle with the use of AI, both in our work lives and in our private lives, and the effects it has with our relationships, on us, on our work, everything. So not the usual type of request that I would entertain for this podcast, but I thought it was such an interesting premise that I really wanted to get Jenny on to talk about it. And I should say, if you are into any type of thoughtful literature, I would recommend picking this book up. It's a gripping read. There's a lot of interesting perspectives on AI in there. There's also it's got a thriller aspect to it as well, got a little bit of a mystery to it as well, which is great. So if you're into that type of work, I would highly recommend picking it up. And even if you're just in content design anyway, we don't get a lot of novels with content designers as protagonists. So I would highly recommend it. And I have said on this show before that I'm a big fan of Ted Chiang, the science fiction short story writer, and I think Jenny's style of writing and Ted Chiang's have a lot in common. So if you're really after thoughtful science fiction that incorporates principles and questions about how we're living our lives today, then I would highly recommend picking up this book. And it's actually available now, so you can go to any place you find books, including your local library if you want to request that they stock it. We've got links in the show notes for where you can pick it up and look at a copy. But yeah, I would highly recommend having a read. But you don't need to have read it to listen to the conversation today. And so we talk about not only working in fiction, moving away from content design, but tackling all of these issues and what Jenny thinks about everything that's happening with AI and content design, because so much of what happens in this novel has a genesis in her own life and her own work. So I know I always hate it when I watch a TV show or read a book and it's about a profession that I happen to know a lot about, and the novel or the TV show just gets it wrong. There's no chance of that here. So I'd highly recommend picking it up, and this conversation was just a great time. So I really hope you enjoy it. As always, if you're interested, head over to UX Content Collective. You can get 20% off with the code podcast20. And we have a couple of great cohorts coming up, and I'll put the links for that for those in the show notes as well. All right, I'll stop talking now, and here's my chat with Jenny Williams about her book, House of Liars. Jenny, I'm really glad to be speaking with you. You've challenged me a little bit, I have to say. I am usually not one for literary fiction. I am. I'm more of a non-fiction man myself, and when I do read fiction, I tend to seek out uh, escapist literature. Let's call it. I love a good Michael Crichton. You know what I mean? That being said, I do delve in occasionally, and reading your book, which I haven't finished, I have to say, but I am reading. I have many questions about it. The first is like, where did this come from? Secondly, what? Well, let's start there. Actually, like, where did this come from? So you have a background in content design. You also have a background in fiction writing. What led you to write this book?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great question. And it's one that's like, it's kind of hard to answer as an author because, books come from everywhere in your life, but they also sometimes come from very specific moments. I originally conceived of this book as a memoir, partly because I was working on this AI ethics team at Microsoft on GPT-3. So early, before ChatGPT came out, back when like nobody knew what a large language model was. You'd say that in a room and just, blank stares everywhere. And so we were working on this really novel, exciting, terrifying technology. And at the same time, I was going through IVF, trying to get pregnant as a single mother by choice. Two, I would say, somewhat unique experiences for people that hadn't been written very much about. And there were a lot of parallels, it felt like to me. I was, I'm using technology for good, essentially, on, what I felt was for good, trying to start a family, trying to become a mother, trying to create a life for this future child. And on the other hand, I'm observing this technology that you could sense from the very early days was going to have a hugely disruptive effect on our society. And kind of watching it and thinking like, how do we stop that, or how do we mitigate these potential harmful effects? And also that sense of what are we giving birth to? What are we creating and sort of bringing into the universe that wasn't there before? And it just, the novelist in me had that little spidey sense that like, there's something here, there's something crossover here that's really interesting and rich. But I'm not a memoirist, and the rest of my life, quite frankly, just isn't that interesting. And so when I thought about like, how do I put this together into a book? The most interesting parts of it ended up being things that I was like, well, this didn't really happen to me, but what if, if this could happen in a narrative form? And so fiction became the vehicle through which to sort of crack open some of these questions that I was having, or some of these juxtapositions or these feelings. I don't write fiction because I already know the answer to something. I write fiction because I have questions about something. And a novel is like the big space, or a big enough canvas to explore those questions. And I also don't think I end up with answers after writing a novel. It's sort of questions that beget more questions. But along the way, it feels like there's an interesting territory to map. And then I hope readers come away with, with their own questions or their own sort of reactions or provocations for their own life.
It's very weird though, because like I've never read something before where the protagonist has the same job that I do, and so like it's interesting sort of reading it and going like, okay, I didn't realize that this would be interesting enough for an outsider to read. But then you look and you're like, I guess it is. Like you're working with like novel technology and words and everything that's happening in our world now. It's pretty, it's pretty confronting to read, to be honest.
One of my teachers, and this has been said by a lot of people in history, but this idea that fiction is the lie that tells the truth. You're creating a fictional space in order to explore something that feels true, emotionally true about the human experience. And when I was thinking about this novel, because it was this sort of memoir framing initially, I thought, well, why shouldn't she be a content designer, right? Why can't we have a content designer as a protagonist? Even though, as to my knowledge, I don't think it's been done before. I can't think of any other novel that has a UX practitioner kind of at the heart of the story. But as you know, and you need to give your characters a job. So I was like, well, this makes sense more than anything else. I know it, so I don't have to make a bunch of stuff up. But there, as the story goes on, it feels more and more essential to have someone with this job telling this kind of story, because I think one of the things that I thought about a lot as a content designer was that the most successful words that I would write in my job were the ones where I disappeared. You know, my voice, the Jenny thinking, the personality, the style, you know, my value system, all of that stuff kind of blended away into the background, and the words became the voice of the product, the voice of the company, the voice of the flow, helping someone get, you know, from A to B, helping someone understand something. And that kind of like disappearing of the self, I think, is a very interesting metaphor maybe for the way that our identities become either highlighted or subverted in the work that we do. And it's especially interesting if you're the kind of content designer or UX writer or content strategist who also has a creative practice of some sort, where, you know, in addition to the things that you're doing in your job, maybe you're also a writer of fiction or poetry. Maybe you're also an artist. Maybe there's other space in your life where you're finding ways to articulate or express what it means for you to be in the world. So it's kind of this dual, like, here's a space in my work life when I'm intentionally disappearing myself. And here's a space in my creative life where I'm trying to articulate the most essential things about who I am in the world. So from that perspective, I think, you know, being a content designer is actually like very interesting and rich.
Did you write this partly as a way to kind of reconcile maybe the different parts of your thinking about AI, and what was it like to sort of explore that through the lens of a fictional story?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really astute way of thinking about it. That is, you know, because I've set it in this fictional world where there's multiple characters who are they all come to this island with this under the same circumstances. So, you know, these writers who are brought to a remote island to compete for a publishing prize. And then they're competing against an AI writer as well. And because I had these 5 human characters, each of them could vocalize some of these different perspectives that, you know, that have emerged within the writing community about, you know, well, this is going to help me or this is going to harm me, or, you know, a lot of that, the nuance to that debate. And, you know, the novel is told from a particular writer's point of view. So we get a lot more of Anna's perspective on it. And her perspective is informed by her work as a content designer. So she's had a much more intimate, intricate relationship with AI than the other writers on the island. But it did feel for me like an opportunity.
And a history with it too. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, a history that kind of comes back in really interesting ways, I think. And so, yeah, for me, it was, you know, I do have some personal opinions about AI. I have some perspectives that for me feel very much about how I grapple with it in my own life and how I want to talk to my son about it and how I want to help other people make informed decisions about how they use it in their own life. But I also feel like you, I don't like being preached at, and I, you know, in a novel, and I don't think that's what novels are for. So I don't want the book to be, you know, here's a diatribe on there's only one right answer to, you know, to AI, or to AI's role in creativity. I think because I came at it from you know, as you said, there's a lot of similarities between Anna, the character, and my biography. I very intentionally took, you know, the pieces of my biography that were narratively convenient and used those things. But I think what's interesting for me about Anna is that she's kind of a warped or twisted version of where I stand in my own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could push her further into some of the darker places that, you know, for me are not a part of my own life, but I could create more tension and more, allow her to maybe walk the darker paths that, that I haven't walked or haven't wanted to walk in my own life. Because I think that one of the things about a lot of the AI resistance or the AI refusal or sort of like anti-AI sentiments is that I think it doesn't fully acknowledge how seductive a lot of these technologies are, and how easy it is to fall into like anthropomorphism and building relationships with things that, you know, talk back to us. Like that's a very natural human emotional response. And a lot of the people that I've seen that are adamantly anti everything, I feel like I'm like, yeah, but we're human. You know, of course people are going to be a little bit flawed. Of course people are going to be a little bit susceptible to these things. So I felt like I wanted to make space for the, you know, the human frailties that we all have. I don't know, maybe some people don't have those frailties. And in that case, like I bow down.
To you. I don't know. Like, I mean, we could get into it, but like so I think you're right. Like there's a seductive quality of the AI in the novel, but also like that's true to life. Like, I don't think that I'm beginning to get quite frustrated, I think, in life with people who are, on the one hand, so completely anti-AI that they won't touch it, which I don't have a problem with at all. But I do have a problem with it when people expect that it's not going to have consequences. So, like, we're now at a point, I think, where the industry has fully embraced these tools. Most industries have. It's going to be a part of working life. I've had conversations with people who say, you know, I really don't want to use these tools. I really don't want to have anything to do with them. But I also want my career to stay exactly the same and not suffer any consequences. And I'm kind of like, that's not really possible, right? Like, maybe like this isn't for you. I think there's a sense that AI has been moralized or immoralized, I guess, like depending on how you view it, in a way that other technologies have not, or at least until much later. Like it wasn't until, say, I think maybe the 2010s that there started to be much more of a popular movement around actually screens like we need, like they're actually causing a lot of harm, right? Same with social media. But it feels like straight out of the gate, AI has got people on, you know, either side of the fence, and you're either with it or against it. I don't know what I'm saying. As I mentioned, I don't have answers. I just have questions. But I don't know. Does it feel that way to you? Because it feels to me like it's just dripping with sort of like moral complications in a way that other technologies haven't.
Yeah, I do think that that's true. And I think one of the research projects I worked on, I started working when I was still at Microsoft, was around AI refusal among fiction writers. So people who say, I don't use AI anywhere in my creative process. And just trying to understand, well, I mean, you know, people, of course, we have a general idea of like why some people, you know, make that decision.
Totally.
But the fact that itself is an object of study, that it becomes a sort of moral stance. I don't use AI, right? We don't ask the same question about like, do you handwrite in pen or do you write a first draft on a laptop? We don't position that as an ethical stance. We position it as like, oh, people have different practices. People have different ways of getting the first draft out.
Yeah, I was going to say it might be like quirky in the sense that maybe someone writes it, but no, it's not like looked down upon necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think there's something materially different about people who use AI in a creative writing scenario for wholesale generation or like unquestioning or a non-interrogation of an AI output. like there's different ways to engage with generative AI that can be more creative or less creative, or where you have more authorship or less authorship. But I agree, broadly speaking, that AI has become like an ethical and a moral like litmus test almost, in ways that I think other technology hasn't. And I do think that there's legitimacy to that. You know, AI itself is not a neutral technology. It's not neutral in the way it's developed, and it's not neutral in the way it's deployed. So it does have inherent value systems. There are all kinds of harms that have, you know, that originated in the way that AI was trained. I mean, my first novel, my first published novel was part of the training data set that these large language models were used originally. You know, I'm a claimant in the Anthropic settlement with authors. You know, nobody asked for my permission to use my book in that way. You know, a product of 10 years of writing and labor and great personal and creative effort, right? And I have very mixed feelings about you know, fair use on a broader scale. I don't necessarily want to dive into that in too much depth, but I do think that it's a there's something that is sticky about having companies use all of this human-made content and then turn around and sell it as something that's explicitly designed to sort of replace humans.
Especially now with this is now extended into the debate about data centers and the expansion of data centers across the United States and increasingly in other countries, including Australia. I can't speak to New Zealand, but I'm sure it's going to start if it hasn't already. Yeah, I don't know. It's just it's feels like the tentacles of this technology have started, you know, wrapping around everything in life. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that metaphor, actually, because it feels that way. It feels like, you know, no matter how, I don't know, like effectively digitally off grid you want to go yourself, it's going to be in all of the services that you encounter. In, you know, it's in government, it's in the way that goods and services are allocated, it's in recommendation engines. You know, I have a book club here in Nelson, and you know, people talk about like, oh, I've used ChatGPT to help you know, talk through some family stuff. I have a friend who's used ChatGPT as a sort of triangulation with her therapist to see if she agrees with what her therapist has been recommending. It's showing up in all of these ways that feel, you know, it's not just a tool that exists in the tech world. It's not just a tool that we're sort of building and then releasing with this, like, oh, here are all the use cases. You know, here's our 10 use cases. Here's our, you know, 6 happy paths. It's kind of this all-purpose thing that people are going to do whatever makes sense in their own lives for, and that's for people who exist outside of the intricacies of, I think, the tech world, and a really focused like UX practice where you think very deeply about use cases and scenarios and, you know, building these flows from A to Z. It feels like a lot of, because it's so accessible and it's so widespread, you know, an electrician is going to pick it up and say, oh, I don't know what can I do with this? And he's going to come up with something completely different and completely out of left field that I think any number of UX practitioners probably wouldn't be able to anticipate. And so then how do you build for this kind of infinite scenario? And how do you build especially to help people understand the limitations of like how far can this tool get you in this particular scenario? And then where does it stop being useful to you? It just, we don't have a good sense as a society yet of where those lines are, I think. We can have some general opinions. Like, I think generally it's probably a bad idea to ask an LLM for, life or death advice in a medical situation, or an emergency situation. I think it's probably not a great idea to use an LLM as a therapist without having anyone else in your life that you're able to soundboard off of. Things like where you really need to get the facts right, probably not a great idea to use LLMs when it's, when it really needs to be accurate. But there's a lot of other nuance in there that I think we just haven't we haven't tested all the edge cases. And because the technology is evolving so fast, you can't really test the edge cases. Like it keeps sort of this like nebulous shifting thing that keeps changing. Just when you think you've got a grasp on it, it's like, no, someone else, push the technology into this other direction over here.
It feels like on both sides of this equation, there are people making dishonest arguments about both the pros and cons of it. And I think that the reality of it is much more connected to the everyday person's experience with AI, and what it means for how they think about their own personal accomplishments and what it means to be successful and explore different strengths. And, what does it mean to be a writer when an AI can write a novel, or you can, if you use AI to help you, are you even a writer? I think those are the much more interesting questions to face.
Yeah. Well, and I think you've touched on something that I think isn't talked about broadly enough, which is a lot of the AI debate is very much framed from these two extreme narratives. It's like AI is going to be the solution and is, abundance everywhere. AI is going to be the doom of humanity and is going to end us all, right? Like these are the two things that feel like they're talking at each other. Whereas a lot of the lived experience of what does it mean to be grappling with these questions right now is in this very murky middle. And that feels to me, like my master's research was speaking with UX practitioners who are working on generative AI right now and having some sort of ethical friction. So a moment or moments of misalignment, values misalignment with what they were being asked to work on. And it seems like a lot of the frustration and the questioning that's happening or that misalignment isn't necessarily because people feel directly opposed to what's happening. Like they're not saying, oh, we see this AI being deployed right here and it's absolutely clearly ethically wrong. It's more like we're not even having these conversations. It was much more ambivalent than opposing. There was a lot more sense of, I think there's really good stuff here, but we're not even researching, we're not even talking about like where it gets a little bit murky. We don't even know if we're asking the right questions. And so it just feels to me like the promises that are being made of this like hyper productivity, everything is going to work at scale. There's abundance everywhere. AI will be able to do all these things. Like the reality of the people who are being asked to pilot that, like by integrating AI into their jobs and, in a kind of maximalist way, a lot of those people are just super burnt out and are questioning, well, what is my purpose here anymore if I'm just like an AI shepherd or just sort of nudging and like checking AI outputs and architecting the system. Is that really where you find human purpose? Like all of the, just to get sort of, vaguely, broadly philosophical for a second, like all of the designs of society should be designed to how do we have better lives? Like how do we feel better as humans about the lives that we're living, about having purpose, about finding meaning, about, making sure we don't completely obliterate our own home world. And yet it seems like these technologies that are being advanced feel like they have a different design goal. Like that's not my design goal is not to eliminate all work for everyone everywhere so that we have kind of an endless leisure. Like I don't actually know what that looks like. What does endless leisure actually look like for people? I feel like my life is meaningful when I'm when I'm working on projects and I'm doing something and I'm participating and contributing and solving problems with other people. And, I'm getting a little bit away from your question, I think, but part of the reason that I left tech when I did about a year ago was that I felt like I was starting to see the way that the content design role was shifting. And it was clearly shifting away from being a human who writes words and being an overseer of AI systems that write words. And then you become the sort of curator, system architect, strategist. And like
Editor,
some people
maybe.
are, yeah, right, exactly. And I think for some people that's very exciting and that works for them in a different way. But the thing is, I really like words. I really like grappling with these these questions of diction and grammar. And, I love that. It gives me joy. It gives me joy in my heart to do that. And the idea that the role would change so drastically that like that wasn't going to be part of my job anymore felt to me like, well, then maybe I should spend my time doing other things.
Well,
You're
not alone.
Yeah.
So what were you going to say?
I was going to say, it's a place of enormous privilege to be able to leave tech. And I think there are people who are staying not because they find the work stimulating and exciting, but because, they have other financial obligations that.
Absolutely.
Right. Like people have mortgages and family, health and people they're supporting and all of that. And so like, it's not, being able to just leave a job you don't like anymore is not a path open to everybody.
Yeah. I talk to them nearly every day. People who saying, well, I don't want to use this technology. But I'm got to keep my job. And I think you're right. Like, I think I've used this analogy a couple of times, but I think it's like when you have when you build something out of Lego and you're really proud of it as a kid, and then all of a sudden it drops and it's breaking and you have to put it back together. It's not going to be the same. It's going to be something different. You've lost that original thing. And maybe you look at the new thing and think, I don't think I want this anymore. I'll put it aside. And I feel like content design, software engineering, product management to a lesser extent, but other roles as well are grappling with all of that. Especially, copywriters as well. If you're if you fancy yourself like Don Draper in Mad Men, writing awesome taglines and coming up with great ideas based on, distilling ideas from books and movies and things into something creative, using AI as a type of editor, curator, generation tool, probably sounds more technical than you want. Or want to. But then there are also people who increasingly love it. Like I speak to people all the time now who say, I don't need to speak to developers to make changes in the product. This is great. I have more control over what like everything as a system and what I'm doing. And I have more control over content as a whole. Again, I think it's just like everything else, content design is sort of grappling with a new world, and like any new world, there's questions about who wants to be in it.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that like all jobs change over time. There are probably a small number of jobs that have existed for hundreds of years that haven't changed, significantly, but probably just a very small number of jobs.
Yeah,
and it's a little bit like we have to embrace the fundamental groundlessness of the universe, right? The fundamental change that things are going to evolve. And then the question is that, well, do you still, do you feel so much allegiance to the idea of content design that you're unwilling to see how the role itself is actually either meets or doesn't meet the goals that you have for your career and the way that you spend the hours of your days? And then maybe look at other things. One of the things I think maybe we don't talk enough about in sort of career change in AI, it's like, well, are there other things that you might have wanted to do that actually feel more approachable to you now because there's all of these tools available to do them? Like maybe you're someone who really, wants to build a small business, but all of, writing business plans or creating all of this other infrastructure, documentation, or admin stuff like felt too intimidating. Is there a way that AI can help do that work for you so that you can explore what it means to be a small business owner? I think that there's a lot that can be open with these technologies and content. I would hate to see people sort of feel trapped by. I hate for people to feel trapped by technology and trapped into a certain job and hating it. When it feels like there's maybe, I don't know, like there may be other paths available to you that are opening now because of these technologies.
But I was just going to say just the pace of change is just too overwhelming for a lot of people, and it probably doesn't need to be that fast. Like we can probably just slow down. I mean, this is why I'm constantly having, as you said before, it's questions about ethics and about responsibility, and I think these are the roles that content designers should be playing. Like not necessarily pumping the brakes and being the doom and gloom of a product meeting, but just as you said before, asking the questions that no one is answering. Do we really need this? Can we achieve it by some other means? Is this what the user really wants? Just basic questions that sometimes sort of go by the wayside when it comes to the relentless pace of new technology.
Well, I think what's interesting to bring it back to my research was that was something that I had anticipated people saying more of, right? Is that, well, yeah, I do feel this ethical obligation. So it is our role as UX. And I think people feel that. People feel that, as UX practitioners, your role is to be the advocate for the user. So if you see something, if you see this AI getting forced into something where you're like, this really isn't going to help someone, or this could even harm them, that is the role, is to like raise your hand and say something. But the current climate with the layoffs, with the, assumption, like the being forced to use AI in your own job, the pressures, it feels like it's becoming harder and harder to play that role. And people feel like, well, if I raise my hand and say something, it's not going to make a difference. Like it's not actually going to, UX just isn't going to get listened to. So the product has already made up their mind. They're going to do this thing regardless. So people don't feel like they can influence it meaningfully. And then if they've raised their hands and they've been like targeted as, oh, this one's a troublemaker.
This one's anti-AI or whatever. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. People don't want to be labeled as anti-AI because then they become, in some companies, it's tied to your performance evaluation and therefore your rewards and so on. And so I don't know. So, I mean, I have a really mixed feeling about it now, because on one hand, I feel like, how is anything in tech going to change if you don't have people working at these companies raising their hands to say, hey, can we slow down and think about this a little bit more? Yeah. But I think to ask UX practitioners to play that role exclusively also then creates this kind of loop of burden and guilt of like, well, then how do you actually do that in a way when then you feel like you've put a target on your back for the next layoff?
I saw one person say there was an online argument going on, as they always do, and someone said, well, I know not to use, I don't need to use drugs to know that they're bad, right? Like I don't need to, and sort of referring to AI as like a drug. I don't need to use drugs to know that they're bad. I actually, to me, I don't know if that's the right analogy. And I'm still sort of thinking this through. To me, I see AI as something more akin to like nuclear power, something that can have devastating effects if managed poorly, Chernobyl, or amazing benefits to society if stewarded well. And in either way, it needs to be done carefully and thoughtfully and with a little bit of, healthy fear. To me, that's the sort of approach to take with it. And anything less than that, I think, is just, irresponsible. You really, and to tie it back to your book, like you feel the weight of that. Like it's not like, what I like is that it's not thrown in. Like I sort of name dropped Michael Crichton before. Like I feel like in a Michael Crichton novel, the AI would be seen as like a MacGuffin or like an enemy. To me, like so far, your book feels more like a philosophical exploration of everything like we've just been discussing. Even in the, even at the beginning so far. So it seems like I'm guessing that was your goal. So
yeah,
well done.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it does turn into sort of a techno thriller, I guess, in the last few chapters. So,
I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I know. Just get ready. Hold on. I do feel like one of the things that's happened in the literary community with AI is that I think there was I can't remember if it was a study or just like anecdotally, but it was editors who did not use AI at all for any of their work, then could not recognize AI generated writing when it was submitted to them. So in the literary world, there have been a couple of scandals where a book publisher withdrew publication of a novel because it was accused of being AI written. There was another, like the Commonwealth Short Story Prize was embroiled in scandal because one of the regional winners, who then became the overall winner, was also accused of being AI generated. And the author's own kind of defense of it has now raised more questions because he was very ambiguous about his process. And I feel like there's this kind of like finger pointing in the writing world of people are trying to like kind of call out when they think other writers have used AI. And if you're not familiar, if you haven't been exposed to AI writing, or if you haven't like interacted with some of these tools yourself, it can be quite difficult to tell. And so the editors who, if like, let's say a publishing house or a magazine has a really strong stance where they don't want AI writing, they want to support human authored works and they don't want AI involved in the writing process. The problem is that if you as an editor haven't engaged with AI at all, then you can't recognize AI tells, right? You just don't know. And it's getting very difficult to tell when something's written by a human, when it's not. The best detection tools just aren't that good. And, false accusation can be enormously harmful and damaging to a writer's reputation. Even I have fallen myself into the trap of like, I'll be reading somebody's Substack and halfway through I'll catch a glimpse of one of those little like, ooh, that has the tang of AI.
Yeah.
And then it then it recasts the whole thing in a different light. It's like, well, shoot, how much can I trust this?
Yeah.
How much do I know that this was like authored by someone with intent and thoughtfulness? And I hate that about myself. I hate that I'm even like aware of it and looking for it. But the part of the reason I'm aware of it is that I've also used these tools. And so I recognize, I'm like, oh, that's a Claude thing. Claude says like genuinely is just all over Claude, my honest assessment, whatever it is, right? You've got these little catchphrases that you feel like, have that little like ping, of
it's
AI.
kind of like seeing the Matrix, sort of the code coming through, and you can sort of see it for what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one thing I will say is that, I can get myself into a dark space about AI and about, the future of technology and humanity. And, doing this research project with UX practitioners who are still in the industry and like actively involved in these spaces, one thing that really surprised me was their optimism. So people felt pessimistic, and there was definitely a lot of like, oh yeah, I've been on burnout leave, or I've had these dark thoughts, or I've really struggled with these things. But almost to a person, people said, essentially acknowledging the current situation is not sustainable. I mean, there's going to be a shift, and some people felt like, well, it's probably going to break before it gets better. And so maybe that break's not going to be great. We hope it's not going to be catastrophic. We hope it's not going to be a huge disaster. But after that, that's when we come in and fix it. Like, humans are adaptable. We'll figure out what's next. We've got all these great UX practitioners in the wings waiting for that thing to be broken and then come in and say, okay, how can we actually make this work for people? Because it feels like right now it's all just about, profit and pace and getting there before China and whatever else, making the numbers work somehow magically. And in a way, this is just my personal opinion, I feel like companies are have been shooting themselves in the foot by making these experiences, like forcing the AI in everywhere until you just become saturated and you hate it. You put enough of it out in the world, of course there's going to be backlash. Like you said, how can you say some of these things as a company executive and not expect people to be angered by that or frustrated by that? So, I don't know if it's going to be like the collective activism of people who say, no, we don't want a data center in the middle of the desert, or, no, we don't want these things to be released unregulated. Like, people will demand better guardrails. Or if it takes some, again, hopefully not catastrophic thing to break, but something that is bad enough where regulators actually, take action against it.
Yeah, totally. And I think we're already seeing some of those things happen. But Jenny, I think with people like yourself writing quality stories and exploring these themes, we'll be okay. So, we've been speaking for an hour, so I can't believe this time has flown by.
Wow.
But House of Liars, it's out now when this episode comes out, so it'll be out now. Where's the best place for people to buy it?
You can go to my website and there's a whole range of options. So, I always recommend that people get it from their local independent bookstore. Certainly, we love bookstores. We want to keep seeing them, or have your local library order it. That's a scalable thing. You don't even have to pay for it. The library gets it, and then it's introduced to a whole host of new readers. So that's where I would recommend.
Awesome. And where else can people find you online?
LinkedIn, please reach out. I am not active in a lot of other platforms these days. I'm trying to keep my digital footprint fairly minimal to, preserve my own sanity.
Yes. Excellent. Jenny, it's been great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's really been fun chatting.
All right, that was my chat with Jenny. Hope you enjoyed it. And I, again, recommend you pick up House of Liars. You can pick it up online, or you can request it at your local library, anywhere you get books, and would highly encourage you to do so. Until next time, I'll see you later. You can message me at patrick@UXContent. And as always, if you want 20% off, head to uxcontent.com and use the code podcast20. All right, see you next time.